Hi everyone, I'm Laura Clark and I'm going to be sharing with you today an evidence-based behavior strategy you can use to support students with disabilities in your classroom. The strategy we're focusing on today is called Precorrection. If you'd like to follow along and download a copy of the slides, use the bit.ly link at the bottom of this slide. Our focus for this series is on looking for those effective and efficient low-intensity strategies that we can use to support student success. All of the strategies, including pre-correction, have a significant evidence base behind them and have been recommended by the Council for Exceptional Children's Behavior Division, known as CCBD. Linked in the slides, on this slide, you'll find the CEC link and the Kentucky CEC link. If you're not already a member of this fantastic organization, I'd highly recommend that you both join and get involved. So we're focusing on pre-correction, which was in a special issue of Beyond Behavior, and I included the table of contents because the strategies that we're using in this series all came from this issue of Beyond Behavior. So when you're looking at what pre-correction is, it's a proactive approach. We're going to do it before the behavior happens. And we're using it to set students up to be successful. And then as Terry Scott says, we're going to give them credit for it, right? So we want to do everything possible to ensure students are successful. So whether that's accessing the curriculum, responding to academic questions, or the behaviors that we're expecting them to exhibit, we want to make sure that students have what they need to be successful. As Anita Archer, who is one of the co-authors of Explicit Instruction, has said for years, if you expect it, pre-correct it. So this pre-correction approach is proactive, and it looks at really changing the classroom environment that will help us prevent those challenging behaviors that are predictable. We anticipate that it might be a challenge, or we know from our data that it is a challenge and has been a challenge over time. Using pre-correction increases the likelihood that the approved behaviors that we want to see happening in our classrooms are occurring. Simply put, pre-correction is simply a reminder of the behavioral expectations you have for any given task, and can be as simple as, class, don't forget, and then a statement of what you expect them to do. So a few quick examples. As we start our reading today, remember that we should have our books open to the right page, or can you remind me of the expectations for our math centers, and then let students tell you the behaviors that are expected for that group. Both of these examples are great examples of pre-correction, ensuring that students are on the right page or doing what they're supposed to in center activities. When we're looking at the research, and the research on pre-correction has been done all the way from Head Start to middle school students in academic settings, we see that this strategy increases students' time on task and has been shown to decrease aggressive behaviors. So the first thing you're always going to do is look for those times and places in your classroom where behaviors are likely to occur. You either want to see more of that behavior, more kids on the right page, or you want to see a behavior decrease, like students are running in the hall when they should be walking. Our focus in pre-correction is always what we want the students to do, not what we want them not to do. Our focus is going to be on what we want students to absolutely do it, do it, do it. So for example, if my whole group instruction expectation is kids sit on the carpet crisscross applesauce, then I'm going to pre-correct that at the beginning of my whole group instruction by saying, remember, the expectation for this time is that we sit crisscross applesauce. An expectation for math might be that the students use a calculator to solve problems, or that they use pencil and paper to solve the problems in what we call the long division style. Note that I didn't say don't use your calculator, but instead I said the expectation in this math center is to solve problems using paper and pencil or using manipulatives, telling students what we want them to do. Remember, before we can pre-correct behavior, we have to have a succinct, quick, clear definition of the behavior that we want to see occurring. We want to know what we expect them to do and what we don't want them to do so that we can state that expectation in a positive and proactive way. So we're going to avoid things like don't be off task or, no one is listening, but rather we're going to say things like, remember, the expectation for independent work is that you stay in your seat and request permission to move. Or instead of saying, don't break the crayons, we're going to say, remember, the expectation is that all the crayons remain in whole pieces unless it breaks on accident. Remember, the expectation is to raise your hand to speak instead of don't talk while I'm talking. So, looking at this student here who is clearly displaying a behavior that might be annoying to a teacher, how might we define this behavior? Well, I can clearly see this student is calling out, me, waving her hand wildly in the room, but she is making great eye contact with the teacher. So I might state the expectations for my independent work are raise your hand and wait for permission to speak. I might say that my expectation is that you raise your hand and share your questions when you are called on. I might say during independent work, please jot your questions down in your notebook, or send me your question in a Google form and I will answer it. Whatever system you are using, but I want to clearly define the behaviors I want to see from the student and ensure that the student knows how to request help. Our goal with pre-correction is always to paint a very clear expectation of the behavior that I want to see, and I need to be extremely clear so that that behavior can be exhibited and repeated over time. Database decision making is absolutely what we need to be doing. So we need to have data on when our students are being highly successful and when students might be having behavioral challenges. So if my data says, for example, that students are running in the hall or that they are calling out without permission, then those are the areas where I will want to pre-correct and remind students of the behavioral expectations for those groups. Once I know what I want students to do and what expected behavior is for that setting, then I'm going to ensure that that behavior is actionable, that the students know what they are expected to do. I'm also going to make sure in that moment that I have taught the expectations, whether I'm using direct instruction, I'm probably giving some great modeling, some examples and non-examples, some scaffolded support, but I'm going to make sure that I teach what I expect students to do. And I'm going to avoid the do not and no pitfalls. So instead of saying, only talk when you have permission, I could say, you can talk during small group work. Those two are both better phrases than don't talk when I'm talking, right? I've told students you can talk when you have permission and you can talk during small group work. Anytime I'm likely to want to say, don't, stop, no, quit it, that's not a good actionable start to my pre-correction. So if that's my first go-to, then I'm going to want to write that down and turn it into a positive. We also want to avoid really vague phrases. A lot of us have pillars that we use in our school, in our classroom, things like be respectful and be responsible. And while those are fantastic expectations, they're not actually actionable for students. What we need to break that down into is what does it look like for our students? So for example, in my whole group instruction, being respectful looks like raising your hand to speak. We're also going to think about adjusting the environment, and this step requires significant planning. So I'm going to ask myself, what can I do better, or what can I just do differently that's going to support students during X time? So for example, I've got students running in the halls during transition. An adjustment I might make to the environment is that I'm going to stand in between my classroom door and the hallway so that I can have eyes both on my students in the classroom and students in the hallway. Or I might scaffold my transition time so that only part of the students are going and getting a drink while the other part of my students are continuing to work. So we go in an A group, B group, C group rotation that would help decrease some of that stress of running in the hallways. I'm going to think about, while I'm looking at my environment, if the task is scaffolded so that it's still too difficult for students. I'm going to look at the length of time that I expect a behavior to think through. If a student calls out after 5 minutes of instruction, is it really reasonable for me to expect them to be silent for 15 minutes? I might need to modify the length of time I expect them to engage in that behavior. I also need to carefully consider the amount of adult supervision that's needed and the type of supervision that's needed, so that if a student needs me to be very close to them and have great proximity, but I'm running a small group and the student is across the room, then that might not be the instructional supports that student needs, or behavioral supports. And are there reinforcers that are needed? Some students are really happy to work for a great job from the teacher, and other students might need a tangible reinforcer in order to follow the directions that are given. I also want to think through, if instructions aren't being followed, were my directions clear? Were my expectations within acceptable parameters, and were they even a physical possibility for my student? And does the student need some kind of an accommodation to meet the expectation or task demand? If I tell students that they must solve problems with paper and pencil, but student Y has an accommodation of a calculator, then I need to provide that accommodation for them to be successful. If you're looking for a perfect partnership of interventions, pairing pre-correction with active supervision is a fantastic pair, just like I like to think of myself with bacon. If you are interested in learning more about active supervision, then check out our NKCES website and sign up for the active supervision online module. So when we're looking at using pre-correction, we want to make sure that we're practicing our statements of pre-correction, and that we're ensuring that if the student has a skill that needs to be generalized over settings or time, that we're making the correct supports for that. We want to make sure that our language is both positive and consistent, and if needed, that we're adding picture supports and written supports if students would benefit from those accommodations. We want to match our school and classroom behavior expectations and give students time to restate those expectations. So if I say that the expectation is to sit crisscross applesauce, and I say to the class, what is our expectation? I'm watching to make sure every student is saying to me, sitting crisscross applesauce. And when I say, show me what that looks like, I'm looking to see that everyone is able to show me what that looks like. I want to confirm that students are, first of all, aware of the expectations, and second of all, do they know how they are expected to show that they know? Can they sit crisscross applesauce? Are they physically capable, and is the time limit I'm expecting that to be within their ability? Can they show me they know? For many of our students, it's important to develop some kind of a system that I can use to support students knowing they've met my expectations. And a cueing system might be as simple as a thumbs up, way to go. It could be a verbal woot woot, way to go. I could be walking around with proximity, touching a student on the shoulder, and then giving them a thumbs up so that they can see they're on track. For some students, they're going to need a bigger reinforcer, and I'll need to make sure that I am reinforcing that behavior as quickly as I can. And the closer that you reinforce a behavior you've seen, the more likely that that behavior will occur again and again over time. We want to catch them being good and praise them quickly. We know that we should use specific praise because other research has shared with us that that is a valuable tool. So making sure we're saying things like, I like the way you are sitting crisscross applesauce, specific praise for the behavior that I'm seeing, and that I'm doing that as quickly as I can paired to the behavior. So the student sits crisscross applesauce and I say, thanks, Samantha, I like the way you're sitting crisscross applesauce. I might also have to develop a separate system for students that's based on what they like. So if a student isn't as motivated by a hands thumbs up or a way to go, then they might need a different system like a token economy or some kind of a classroom reward. Don't forget, we definitely want to start out with strong encouragement and praise as we are beginning this pre-correction process. We can modify how often we're giving that pre-correction praise over time. But to start with, we want to closely pair the following of a pre-correction or a statement of behavioral expectations with praise. If you're looking for some preference inventories to see what actually will motivate your students, linked into this slide is the website positivepartnerships.com, which has some great reinforcement inventories. You want to make sure that you have an excellent plan that will reward students for following your expectations. And keep in mind, not every student is going to be motivated by a great job. We need to meet students where they are. So this could be, our classroom PBIS bucks. This could be some kind of a really specific token economy for that student that says first you follow the teacher directions and then 5 minutes on a device. We want to make sure that we're teaching and reteaching the expectations for our students and that we're providing them with very rich practice opportunities. Anita Archer uses the phrase practice turns with feedback, and we want to make sure that we're providing students with lots of practice turns and that we're giving them very explicit feedback as they go. We can use all different kinds of prompts to let students know if they're on track. I can give them some kind of a gesture like a thumbs up. I can give them verbal praise. I definitely can provide some environmental prompts like class signs that remind students of the expectations for each type of activity for the day. I can also do some what are called manual prompts, which are what I'm doing around the room. So whether I'm providing active supervision, I'm greeting students at the door, but I'm making sure that I am providing students with clear prompts to let them know if they are following the steps that I'm expecting. I also want to make sure that I'm monitoring the interventions that I put in place. So if pre-correction is being used, I'm going to take data to see if the system I put in place is working, and that way I'll know if I need to make some changes or to continue with what I'm doing. If you're looking to learn more about pre-correction, if you go to the CI3T website and click on the Professional Learning tab, you'll find excellent resources, some data management tools, videos, and other tools that you may use to help you implement pre-correction in your classroom. Looking down the tab, you'll see that there are some excellent short videos and some other resources, including an implementation checklist and a treatment integrity checklist. Both of those are very helpful in making sure that you are implementing pre-correction in a way that will make a difference to students in the classroom. The implementation checklist I think is super helpful. It's an easy 1, 2, 3 checklist just to make sure that I've followed all the steps to ensure I'm implementing pre-correction accurately. The last thing you'll want to do is to get some feedback both from students and other adults to make sure that you're implementing pre-correction in a way that's making a positive impact on student behavior. As you analyze your data and get feedback from others, it will help you know if you need to continue using this intervention in exactly the same way or if it needs some tweaks to be appropriate for your setting. If you're taking this training as part of our summer training series, then please go back to your email, check out the additional resources, and complete the quiz or evaluation. And don't hesitate to reach out to me if you have questions. My email is here on the slide. And we would love for you to join us for additional trainings. You can learn more at the NKCES website. Thanks for joining us.